action research field. And, great to see you moving from US-based to UK-based now, and you find a lot of details in the program about Jack Wildwood, so amazing to you. But over to you, Jack. Thank you.
Thanks very much indeed. Yeah, it's a real pleasure to be here, and many thanks, to Emmanuel, Colin, and others for inviting me, because I went to the first World Congress in Brisbane, and then the second, helped to organise the third in Bath, and then I went to the seventh in Groningen. And I've seen this enormous growth in action learning, action research programs around the world. And what I was asked to talk about today focused on the professional experience. Okay, so that's what I really want to concentrate on in terms of the conversation today. And I do hope that if you feel that you want to actually interject, or you had something that you wanted to tackle today, that you won't hesitate just to ask in the course of the program, because I really would love to feel that I wasn't going to talk at you for 30 minutes or whatever, and then questions. So if you feel that interaction, please do just ask. Now, what I wanted to do is just to show you, I just want to introduce something, and as long as this is working, because the thing itself has now just said it can't open the page, which is just a bit of a disaster, where I got here this action and the action research experience of professionals. And I just want to mention something that guides my own practice, and I hope that you'll recognise. And it is that, as I speak to you now, I'm doing something that this Soviet psychologist, Fyodor Vasilyev, talked about in his psychology of experiencing. And he said, look, we all know that energy really comes into everything we do. But when you look at our writings, then energy with motivation, energy with meaning, energy with values in particular, we're in very bad at actually communicating these embodied expressions of meaning. So when I'm talking about experiencing, I'm hoping that even in the here and now, you're sensing in terms of my expression of energy, largely because I'm present with you, that being with you actually evokes in me this sense of energy that I'm with a group of committed educators, people who are actually wanting to improve the world, to live their values as fully as possible. And that this sense of the immediacy of this embodied power and energy is something that we very rarely manage to get into our texts. And what I want to do is just to try to show you a few of the things that I've been doing to link in the texts with what I call the multimedia data. That if you go into the actionresearch.net, this website, and you go over to the What's New section here, you'll be able to get the PowerPoint slides to support this conversation. Also, if you go down to What's Next, you'll get my notes that's actually more detailed to support what I'm saying. And then you'll be able to go into what I've been working on, which are called these living posters, which they come from all over the world in terms of action researchers, action learners, are all willing to explain their educational influences in their own learning. So what we've been doing is to encourage the action learners and action researchers from all around the world to create what we've been calling their own living educational theories. These are the explanations that you give for the influences that you're having as you try to live your values as fully as possible. Now, I do hope I'm making sense there, because if you were to look at it's the PowerPoint slide, which comes from Norwich University, the details about what it is they're claiming for themselves. And if you look at this value, which is right at the heart of Norwich University, it is responsibility to and for others begins with each individual accepting responsibility for the complete integrity of his or her own behaviour. Now that is at the heart of what which university claims that it stands for. And if you think of your own inquiries, which actually bring that quality of responsibility at the heart of your explanation of your influence, then this is what I've been working on with action learners and researchers all over the world. And what I'm hoping is that at some point over the next few weeks, you'll access this particular homepage of Living Theories, because they actually are focused on the professional experience of people who are willing to hold that responsibility at the heart of what they do, to communicate the meanings of their embodied values. Now, as we talk about values, I'm thinking of the relationally dynamic values, your ontological values, the values you use to give meaning and purpose to your lives. So you'll be able to access from my website the doctoral candidates who've actually used love as the central principle. So the first one went through in about 2006 at the University of Bath, and it was about love at work. And that was the title. And it's the first time that love as an academic standard of judgment had been accepted in the university. Others work to do within the health service, a passion for compassion, using multimedia visual data from patients and carers to show those meanings that were embodied and expressed in practice. But the narratives are all coming from individuals who are willing to account for themselves and actually hold their explanations in public for us to look at, and that's what we've been sharing. Now, I'll point to this because I first presented the 2017 version in Cartagena at the Action Research Learning Network of the Americas, and I just want to point just to some of these because I do hope that you access them. If you go into this one, now it surprised me because this is a Mongolian Action Research Network. I've never heard of the Mongolian Action Research Network. Delightful accounts of what they're doing. They've just updated their homepage with their living theories, and that is accessible for you here. If you go along all of these are groups around the world that are actually focusing on educational action research in Ireland. The individuals like Bernie Sullivan, if I just mentioned that the four top women here are quite extraordinary. They all got their living theory doctorates with living theory in the title. These are all action learning, action research programs from the University of Limerick in 2006 and 7. And since then, they've worked together over the past 12 years and helped to create the network Educational Action Research Ireland. They've been supported by the New Zealand action researcher, Pip Bruce Ferguson, who went over there to Coventry City University to spend 3 years there to help them with their programs. But I do hope you'll get in there and just have a look at their narratives, because if you look at Bernie Sullivan, Bernie, actually her doctorate was all about enabling travellers' children, we call them in Ireland, to have equality of opportunity with the children who are coming from more normal static families. So Bernie looked at that, and she talks about her interests. This is what a living poster is. It actually gives details of your values. These are their latest publications: Enhancing Practice Through Classroom Research, Introduction to Critical Reflection, and this one here about the learning communities, I do hope you get, because they actually, I think, do what we would all espouse and desire to do, and they show how they have sustained over years a learning community with the Irish researchers. And at the end of this book, you're invited into a space for reflections, like Hillary's created with Action AR+. And people are now responding from all over the world in terms of their reflections on their spaces, connecting in with this network, Education Action Research Ireland. For that, there's Bernie Sullivan, Mary Roach, Marion Glenn, and I do hope, as I say, that you will access some of these to see how you too can actually engage with them and to see exactly not only what other people are doing, but actually what you're doing. If I move down here, these posters here, they look at the different individuals and groups around the world, like the University of Humanistic Studies in Utrecht. Now, I passed a doctoral thesis 2 weeks ago by Anne Mannon, and this will be made available on the web from my website. And it was all about inclusive internationalization in higher education. And it was the narrative of how in a university, the rhetoric of inclusivity was really strong, very powerful indeed. But the lived reality in the university itself fell far short of what the claims were being made. And this doctoral inquiry is looking at all the tensions of revealing this contradiction between the vision and the reality. And that narrative, I was asking Anne in the Viva, well, how, Anne, can you now take these ideas and spread them globally? And she's actually just put in €1 million proposal with another colleague that's got her doctorate to work on these ideas to actually take them globally about the inclusive internationalization of higher education. But what each of these individuals is willing to do is to narrate their own accounts of their own practice as they experience themselves as living contradictions. That idea of a living contradiction is really important. In 1972, I was given a video camera in London. It was one of the first where a teacher was asked to explore its potential in their classroom. I got a shock because I turned it on myself. I thought I'd got inquiry learning going in the classroom with my students. I thought they were asking the questions, I was answering. The videotape showed that, however subtly, I was giving them the questions. Now that was an enormous shock to me. I wasn't hypocritical, I just did not know that that is what I was doing. And a lot of people have reported that same feeling of being a contradiction when they turn the videotape on themselves, look at their own practice, and say, what must I do to live my values more fully? And this is where this digital visual data has become very important. I hope I'm making sense here, because we had to work at the University of Bath. We had to change the regulations governing research degrees. In 2004, I was on the Senate committee, and there were four of us, Julie Marshall, who was at the Centre for Action Research, and Bath with myself. We just managed to get a paragraph which recommended that in future research degrees should be permitted to be submitted as e-media so you could bring in digital visual data. Now, we've had 10 years of struggle, but that just went through without any problem at all. So in 2004, one of my students, Mary Harthall, was the first to get a multimedia doctorate through the university in terms of this kind of inquiry. But you might find that you need to take on some of these structural issues politically if you find that there are certain blocks in terms of what Hillary was talking about, in terms of the positivist scientists still controlling what counts as knowledge. Now, I also want to mention this because this has also been very important indeed in terms of my own research. In Cartagena, Juan de Sousa Santos gave a keynote which was based on his book on epistemologies of the South. Now, it was about justice. And he has this phrase, we would pronounce it in the UK, epistemicide. You may have a different pronunciation. But what I liked about it was that Juan de Sousa Santos was saying, look, the Western academics should be very careful indeed about the nature of the knowledge that they're using in a way to colonize the indigenous groups of which de Sousa Santos identifies with. And he said that the Western epistemologies have a tendency to kill off, and that was the phrase of the epistemicide. It was about the killing off of knowledges from the South. Now, when I looked at what I was doing in my own research, I had to be very careful indeed, because I imagine as academics and some practitioners that you feel the same kind of tension as myself. I was at the University of Bath. We got the highest research ratings over some 15 years once I was there. But we had to conform to particular kinds of publication in international research journals. Now, what I discovered is that what I was doing whilst I was conforming to those kind of theories and models is that I was actually eliminating the voice of the practitioner from the very publications that I was getting very highly regarded for at the university. And a lot of money was coming in with myself and my colleagues because we were getting these kinds of publications. Now, this is something I would just ask you to think about very carefully, because the very first project that I directed, and I did some evaluation on it, was about mixed ability groups in science. And I worked with 6 teachers for 18 months. I explained what we were doing when I first drafted out my explanation in models of evaluation, models of curriculum development, models of the changes in teaching and learning. The 6 teachers looked at this after my academic colleagues had said this was a really good piece of work, Jack, we understood what you were talking about. The teacher said, look, Jack, we just cannot see ourselves in your explanation. And as soon as they said that criticism, I could see it was justified. They asked me then to go back to the data and actually construct an account which they could recognise as including themselves. Now, as soon as they said the criticism, I could see that what I'd done was the very thing that I was objecting to. I have conformed my explanation to the academic explanations and omitted the explanations of the teachers. When I went back to the data, presented it back to them, it was in the form of action learning cycles. And that was the first time that explicitly I had made public an action reflection cycle, which was about the problem definition, imagining what to do, it was acting and gathering data, it was then evaluating, it was modifying, and all the kind of action reflection cycles that I think we were used to in action learning and action research. The teachers then recognise themselves within that narrative. But I still, even, whilst I've been doing this 50 years since the first lesson that I taught in a science lesson, when I asked, how do I improve what I'm doing? And I'm still asking that kind of question, but the meaning of the question has changed dramatically as my eye has developed over the last 50 years, my context has changed, and so today, for example, when I'm still asking that question, it's in the context of ALARA, wondering how that we can generate a social movement which is stronger than it has been before in terms of the values that we hold. Now, I'll just pause there just to ask if there's anything you'd like to come back on in terms of what I've been saying. So, can I just ask? Is it yes?
Who's the author of the epistemologies itself?
It's called D'Souza Santos. If you go into the PowerPoint slide that I produced and that what's new, you'll get the references there. Yeah, but it really is.
Where are the slides?
Pardon?
Where are the slides?
That was on the What's New section. So I was saying that if you go into the What's New section of actionresearch.net, so this one, this is actionresearch.net, and this section here on the right is the What's New section. Now, if you go into the What's New, and you just to click on this section here on your computer, that now is downloading the PowerPoint slides to my, yeah? So you can actually access those as you can the actual notes with these references, excuse me, and the points that I'm making. But is there anything else that you'd like just to ask about in terms of what I've been saying? Because it feels very important that you're feeling energised yourself, like at Norwich. We don't have any action research, living theory accounts from Norwich, even though the values that the President was talking about today, he was saying, look how consistent they are with ALARA's values. And yet we don't have any of those narratives coming from this context that we can share, for example, in that section of living theory posters which we've got from the What's New section. So just clicking on that, closing all that, and we can, as I said, access from all over the world what the people are actually doing. Yes, in the back.
So I was just struck by what you said, something like, does embodied power and energy emerge in our relationships when we work with people?
Yeah.
And I was just thinking of all the PhD students we work with, in my particular case, without going into much detail, who want to go out and do a bunch of interviews. And this statement, how will embodied power and energy emerge in a relationship just through interviews, would shape their foundations.
It would. So, no, if you look at the traditional methods that, for example, educational researchers and social scientists have been encouraged to use, they are so limited. Questionnaires and interviews. Now, if you compare that with some of the digital visual data you get from practice, as you look at what you and I are actually doing, the meanings are very different from the ones you elicit from an interview. It's not that I'm denying some of the value of the data you can collect, but it is so limited. Sorry, go on.
Well, so just a question, maybe for now, or just for, as you continue your presentation, is what are the methodological implications of that? Of taking on this empathetic need to generate energy with people, or to be in energy with people? Like, what are the methodological pathways that should lead us down in terms of action research?
Yeah, yes, Stu?
I just want to add, and if we have that conversation, at some point, I would want to know what do we do at the institutional level in terms of education, the IRB, being able to promote this kind of research, because as a doctoral student, I know that I couldn't collect data until I have IRB approval. So I think in action research, there's need to know your environment of research, the people, and that requires some interaction. And so I think so if we ask that question, that's the other part. So later on.
Yeah, sure. That's the slide that I'd like to direct you to answer the question is this one about knowledge creation from the educational experiences of professionals. Now, what I've done there, you've got the URLs, you click on them, and these accounts immediately come up for you, which are showing master's student, for example, working with 6-year-old pupils on their action research programs, and the visuals show you the 6-year-olds actually informing each other about action reflection cycles and how they're using the class as a validation group. The next one is of 10-year-olds in Croatia with this pedagogue called Branko Bogner, who is doing the same thing with 10-year-olds, using the video, using the reflections of the pupils to show how we can do this. The next one, 17-year-olds in the UK, with people who are going through their entrance exams to university. And I've also put in one myself with a PhD student to show you the influence that I'm having. Now, each of those, if you like, has been accredited either for master's programs. The doctoral student got his doctorate. And I've also put, I'll show you we can access these, because in the last 16 years at the University of Bath, 16 of my doctoral students actually were successful. And I put them all on the web with their approval. So you can actually see and access how these doctorates have been accredited using these methods and approaches, and in particular, the epistemology. This is very important, that in this living theory process, developed from the action learning research, you've got a very different epistemology to the normal social science one. The actual explanatory principles are the embodied values that you express in what it is you are doing. So I hope you can feel my energy in terms of being with you. Now, I've got a passion for academic freedom, and in terms of my accounts and difficulties sometimes with the University of Bath, my first book was all about that engagement with the issue of academic freedom in terms of the university. And that came into my own doctorate. So I do hope you'll follow this up with me, because it's something I've worked on for the last 30, 40 years to try to make sure that practitioner researchers like ourselves manage to get very good academic accreditation using these approaches without distorting the embodied knowledge that we have. So do please follow that up. Yeah. Is there anything else?
Jack, if you could just stay behind the mic, it would help.
Say that again?
Just stay nearer to the mic.
Ah, right, okay.
But that question didn't get answered, and that's the ethical approval that it should already be using video.
Yeah, when I say I've had no problems getting ethical approval, it doesn't mean that questions haven't been asked. I'll give you some examples where a research board at a northern university in the UK asked for the I, the personal pronoun, to be removed from the inquiry. And the inquiry is by a head teacher, how do I improve what I'm doing? Now, yeah, it is farcical, and we had to, if you like, we had to show just how farcical that request was in relation to the research paradigm that we were using. Now, with the ethics, for example, now, I've got that camera, and it's just on me. I don't need to ask anybody else's ethical approval to gather that data for myself. Now, when it comes to, if I was to swivel it round, I would have to ask you what ethical approval if I actually wanted to use that kind of data. And that's what I've been able to put through various ethics committees using the guidelines of what's called the British Educational Research Association. The other one we use are the Psychological Association's ethical guidelines. And we find it is possible to put some very sensitive, like I've got, one of my doctoral students was working with murderers within prisons, and that became very difficult ethically to bring that data into the public domain. So there are issues and there are difficulties. But all of my own doctoral students went through with, as I say, they all got ethical approval in a very wide range of universities. But you might be pushed back a little bit, and you've just got to persevere and just keep going. See what the response is. They have to give it in writing, and I believe that you will always be able to meet it all the time using these kind of approaches. Okay. Yes, Jackie?
I think it's important to reiterate what you just said, that it takes some time and persistence, I would say dogged persistence, to get that to be an acceptable way of doing research. So the first time it goes through, and I can tell you from personal experience, the first time it goes through, you get no. And then you go back and you rework it again and you get no again. And the third time, they're tired of saying no and away it goes. But they don't have the experience with it. And so until they have the experience and they see that there's no harm done, right, which is the important part, no harm done, no surprises, then after there is some repertoire of experience, then it goes.
I mean, in this room we've got people that have been through those kinds of procedures. You know, I mean, Judy McBride, certainly within her inquiries and her colleagues, have faced up to ethical issues to do with a process they're going to do in the workshop on metasage. Certainly Jackie has gone through that process of ethical permission. I've gone through it myself. And the big thing is to recognise that you're actually not alone. I've often got people writing to me just to say, look, we've got a bit of a problem, Jack, in terms of the ethical approval. They send me what they've got, and I've been able to actually just make suggestions, which makes it easier for them, that approval to be given. Now, when Jackie talked about this very different, it is a very different understanding of knowledge. When I did my first philosophy programme, the philosophers, I valued enormously what they did with me, but it was with two in the United Kingdom, they were called Richard Peters and Paul Hurst, and their text was Ethics and Education. This was Richard Peters. So we would spend hours, and this went on for 2 years, just looking at the meaning of words like justice, freedom, consideration of interests, respect for persons, democratic procedures. Right? Now, every word was defined in terms of other words. And that's what I'm meaning when I talk about lexical definitions. And this is the kind of definition that most universities are used to when you actually bring values into the discourse. Now, if you take this kind of approach to research, to educational research, you're bringing embodied expressions of meaning. You're using what we call ostensive expressions. You're not defining words in terms of other words. You're pointing to your practice and saying, this is what I mean by love or justice, as it is emerging in practice. And you show people those meanings as they are coming out of what it is that you are doing. That is a very different approach to values and explanatory principles than just using definitions of words in terms of other words. That's why narrative is so powerful. Using this self-study, narrative, the action learning, action research are all important in the generation, I think, of your living educational theory. This idea you can explain your educational influence based in the values that you use to give meaning and purpose to your life. And that's why I call them that they carry hope for the flourishing of humanity. I think those are very, very important indeed in terms of what we do in ALARA to try and spread the influence of these values, no matter where we are, to try to actually make the world a better place. And in conclusion, what I'd like to do is just to show you how you can actually access. I'll just go through these very quickly, because I've mentioned the energy flowing values and the digital multimedia narratives. And I've said about my own experience that I draw insights from so many different theories, but no one theory can explain my educational influence. I hope I'm making sense here. That's why I'm encouraging each one of you to generate your own unique and original explanation of your educational influence. Because you can draw insights from theories, like I do from Barnabas de Souza Santos. Like I do, for example, there's a theologian I like very much called Paul Tillich. And he had a point, what he called the power of being. He talked about it's an amazing experience of being moved by what he called the power of being itself. Now, if you've been in an educative relationship where you feel that mutuality, and there's an enormous transfer of communication and energy between them, I think you'll understand that sense of the power of being itself. And it's to try to bring insights from these different theoretical perspectives into your own living theory of character. And you'll find, like Mary was looking at, for example, the Action Research Plus. I've got some students who are looking at the work of the psychotherapists. Alfred Adler, for example, is one group who's actually drawing insights in terms of their self-study from the work of Alfred Adler. Now, others have worked on Jung, they've worked on Freud, but they've drawn those insights, very important insights, into their own generation of their living theory, without their explanation being subsumed under Freud or Adler or Jung. I hope I'm making sense there, because it rests upon your creativity and your desire to generate your authentic explanation of your influence based on your values. And each one of you have got a unique constellation of values that you use to give meaning and purpose to your life, that you can bring into your action learning, action research with the living theories that you can produce. So let me just hesitate, and I'll show you my last slide. And it's about 10 years ago, a number of us, we thought that the traditional journals weren't allowing us to bring in the multimedia accounts with the data. So we created the Educational Journal of Living Theories, and we've related it to transformational social change. Now, again, you've got an archive there, you can access the actual texts which people are producing. As I say, the 10th one is actually now being developed. I'll go into my website so you can access that. But I do hope you'll get into this, because from the What's New section, you can get into the Educational Journal of Living Theories, this one here, because it gives you the opportunity to publish your own living theories in a multimedia format. So it's one of the few journals where you can actually integrate, in that embodied sense, the videotapes of your own practice, analyse them, and actually have them accepted in a refereed journal. And you can just get access to all the archives. You've got, these are all the archives. The one I was telling you about from the Croatian educator, that's the first one here. The pupils as action researchers improving something important in our lives. That's the one you can just access with the videotapes of the children going through the action learning, action research cycles, and you can see how they, the two teachers, one is a university pedagogue, the other is the teacher, have explained their influence from the ground of their values. But this is the forum that many people are now using to communicate globally their living theories. Are there any other points? Because that was the last slide, but I just wanted to draw your attention to in terms of accessing a journal, a refereed journal, which is now accessible, as I say, different parts of the world, that you can actually get your accounts, along with the other journals like Action Research, Educational Action Research. But as I say, I think one of the benefits of the Journal of Living Theories is its multimedia nature, and it allows you to communicate that energy of yours with the values that are embodied in what you're doing, and actually communicate those meanings in terms of our shared community. Are there any other questions that you just really like to ask? Connections? Yes?
I have a question about supporting doctoral students again. Some of my doctoral students who are doing, I have one doing an autoethnography now about his own teacher burnout experience. And I think the burnout is turning into dissipation burnout. You know, he feels alone in the process. I'm trying to kind of insulate him and support support his work, but he is wrestling with some of that. Does this count? Does this, he doesn't, even when he talks to his peers. And so I guess as an advisor, my question is, although I may see the big picture and know what a value his voice is bringing, how do I support him in that?
Well, if you get into that left-hand column here, and you go into the over 40 living theory doctorates from different parts of the world, and I think you'll find that each of those doctorates has gone through some of those kind of tensions, and it's documented within their doctorates. But what I found is that the individual feeling isolated is one thing, but for example, every week on a Sunday evening I've got a research support group. Lunchtime I've got a postdoctoral group. But we all share our accounts of where we are, and it actually helps to overcome that sense of the isolation. That if you can be within a community that will read what you're doing, respond to it over time, and it's shown that it has this sustained commitment to you and what you're doing, and you to them, that is the best way that I've found to actually help to overcome, although sometimes it is very, very painful indeed, and people have just got to take time out. One or two students of mine have really said, look, it's right for you to take a suspension. Don't hesitate, this is available for you. You just need 6 months, and they've come back and then they've completed. But I think that's a vital question about how to provide support. And it may be that some of these, when you get into this from Bruce, Leslie Wood's colleague, and Leslie was at Nelson Mandela University. Bruce will be in the workshop through Skype tomorrow. In fact, if you come to that workshop, you might like to ask them, because each person will have gone through that kind of tension. Marion Glenn should be on from Ireland. Sarup Rawal from India. Sarup is doing amazing work on life skills program through the Indian government. But each one of them will recognise what you're saying in terms of these inquiries. Okay. Is there anything else, or are we okay?
So can I make a suggestion about that? And so one of the great things that I did when I was part of the PhD program was it was a community practice. And so there was a group of 5 of us all doing it together, and that just made such a difference. So even if we had a virtual community practice through other connections of PhD students across the globe, we have that kind of shared understanding that would really help and really make a difference. Yeah, so now with Zoom and so on, it's easy enough to do and organise, but just to have that shared understanding makes such a difference for us.
Yeah, and tomorrow, Marie Huxtable is in the UK coordinating the Skypes. And actually, I put you in touch with Marie because I think she would be delighted to make that connection. We've got groups, as I say, of PhD students that it may be for your own students and may enjoy hearing and sharing. Okay? Thanks.
I think one of the other issues raised was around ethics, so we have a bit of time. So I've been really interested to kind of any stories you have of getting through ethics processes with different forms of practice. I know I've struggled as well, but it's eventually if you persist, you kind of get through it, you understand it. Yeah, maybe that can seem a form of research before. So,
and I think that also raised the issue whether, in fact, we are getting to a point where we, as ASHA researchers, we need to really re-evaluate and think whether we need to come out with certain guidelines that will deal with the ALARA issues. Because if the positive tradition will even take us seriously, then we need to really re-evaluate and figure out what exactly. I got to a point where I have to literally meet with the ALARA to give them some kind of my perspective of what we in the ASHA research community understand ASHA research to be. So they understand exactly what the issues are that the researchers, what we call in the dissertation phase, are actually participants in the research at a point, and there is that sense of dynamics. But how we are able to deal with that is bringing an issue whether we need, as a body, to come out and provide some kind of formal guidelines or something so that we address this issue.
Yeah, we're actually starting that in South Africa. It's with 5 universities, Bruce is on the team as well. And we're each working with community-based research more than living theory, although it's organized. And we've each got projects at our own universities, so we're going to use that knowledge, but we want to come up with guidelines for everything. And the first thing that we've identified needed is education. Because people are going out into communities and just doing harm and causing havoc and doing it from a directive way and just not weighing the values of what we are supposed to be. So that's one of our aims, and then other ones are actually producing ethical guidelines using the principles, but how do we interpret it when we get in there? And my idea is my next ethics, I'm bringing it to the ethics community, because they always have a community member there, there's some random nurse from so bringing it into discourse and let them see them and draw the going on and say, this is what I think is ethical. And I think that is risky, because people they might not let you in, you want to throw it out. But you have to take risks, and you have to start.
And I agree with you. I have about 5 of my mentees here. Some of them are graduated, and they can all tell their stories about the challenges and difficulty they have to do with Arabic. It's something that I think we need to rethink through that. And also talk about the issue of collaboration. One of the things I did with my mentee was for them to develop a collaborative network among themselves. To be able, that goes back to the question you're asking about, so that if we're talking about collaboration, how do you do it among yourself as learners or as students, so that you tap into the energy and help to support each other. And I think that is another issue that we could probably maybe look at. I'm also looking into probably writing a journal that handbook on methodological issues in national research and see how those issues could be addressed. So I hope that we can get some of those to really offer some perspective and join into addressing this issue, because it's a serious issue we need to address, because I have run into that serious challenge. Until I let you
Maybe we can take that. Sorry, I don't want to conclude. Yeah, it's just that this came out this week, and I know people in Bath would not be pleased if I didn't mention it. It's just that Living Through Research is a Way of Life, that was just published this week. And it was our attempt to do what it is we're now talking about in terms of what are the principles, how do we conduct this inquiry, and that importance of the collaborations really vital. Hillary, could you?
Yeah, just a couple of things. I think Mary Brighton Miller, your work on ethics helps us understand that action research is a more ethical, it's easier to sell if we come at it rather than coming from the anxiety. I love the idea of bringing in participants, but I know from many stories that there's more anxiety than there are difficulties. I've actually never heard, and maybe I'm wrong, I've never heard of somebody getting it denied. I think our problem as action researchers is a different problem, which is many people saying, I'm going to bypass it's exempt, but then you can't publish it. And so I strongly recommend working with the IRB people. I've often found them educated and open-minded. They just don't know because, like the story I mentioned, most people have never heard of anything other than the scientific method. So educate them and bring them on board. Have them be participants in your effort.
So what was said to me, potentially trying to get stuff with curriculum administrators, as well as IRBs, is that when we're setting up a project for a student, we really need to name the stakeholders. Okay, so we always point the fact that the stakeholders will be IRBs, because all common practices are going to be challenged by us, and they need to be part of the process to get them through. That creates a little bit of extra work initially, but what we're doing basically is to help institutions work through modifying the gap and accommodate practices that are inherent in our work. Stakeholders.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, I just want to comment on what Professor Tete said about collaboration. You see, it's easy to mention collaboration among data scholars. It's difficult because of the topics, because of the methods, and because of what is involved. You can tell somebody who is doing some study to look at somebody who is maybe into other mixed somebody who is doing humanity is nothing. You look at somebody who is doing policy. There's variation. Even though there are different classes, they teach, they can not the so attention was taken. That's why you can call it ontology. If you ask me the question, you're doing research for consulting, and I'm doing policy. I give you mine, it doesn't go. So that's a problem.
Yes, but it's just as important, Alice, in terms of the work on collaboration, because what I'm curious about is when you look at, if I like, the people in this room and the embodied knowledge that we all have, is how can we now strengthen the communication so that what Travis is doing in New York in terms of Queen's College, is spread more widely. Leslie's work, I know Leslie is going to the Action Research Network of the Americas conference, and that will be in a couple of weeks, I think, Leslie. And Leslie has already analysed quite a lot of the pre-seminar conferences that took place about 18 months ago, and it hopefully will be published in Educational Action Research. But I'm just curious about how do we get, like we've got Ernie's amazing work in terms of communities and community-based research. And we know, personally, I know of this work, and yet I'd like very much to work out how do we spread our understandings and influences so that we grow from this 10th conference and we answer that question about the living legacies, about, well, where are we now going from here to actually strengthen what it is that we are doing. And it's not easy, is it? Because we've seen with Hillary, with Action Research Plus, you've got the spaces in the forums. You've got the Irish group, I know that they've got a forum as well. Maybe, Hillary, in terms of what is happening with actionresearch.net, it's expanding, it's growing, and that's fine. Or whether there's something that we might be able to do to work out how we do it, so that the sense of community and cooperation actually strengthens and enhances from here. And I know, Emmanuel, I think you're very keen indeed to get that dialogue going so that we can really see what it is that the living legacies are moving on to. Yeah. Are you okay? Is there anything else? No? No, thank you. That's good.
Jeff is actually just a nice introduction to Wednesday's panel. That's the conversation we'd like to have. By the time we've talked about legacy, where do we go to from here? How do we make something I think was discussed 10 years ago.
Yeah, correct.
In Netherlands. Still that doesn't exist. What can we do to make it happen? Hillary's starting in one direction. And I think there's lots that can be built from that, but it's also something that ALARA wants to be part of. How do we make the worldwide communities, there are over 100, aware of each other and communicate with one another? That's also a conversation. There's now a break.
Yeah, it'll be there all day. Yeah, because it's a nocturnal. It'll fly away.
It's quite a way. It's quite a way. I mean, I wasn't able to have a friend every day.
And so trusting.
Jackie, do you know what the small is called? It's like a farmer.